Welcome back to the Masters of Modern podcast. I am your host, Ben Bateman. This is the other host, Mr. Michael Grothy, and we're here to talk to you today about Magic. How y'all doing? Well, it's not a live audience, so that didn't work, but we're excited.
I'm doing great, Ben. I'm back in the studio with my Masters of Modern friends.
Yeah, that's Marshall, Marsh Unfocused on Twitter, and we're excited to have him here. He still is the official producer of the show. He's just off-site most of the time now, but it is nice to have somebody checking the levels. I've been talking a lot. Michael, how are you?
I'm good. We had another exciting Pioneer Players Tour last weekend. Some good viewing, some good Pioneer tech. It was interesting to have the Players Tours one after the other like that, because that never happens with the Pro Tour, right? Where it's like a Pro Tour with another Pro Tour the next weekend. But for the Players Tour, you have like extremely high level Magic being played. Then you see the results, and then players have a week to prepare for another extremely high-level Magic event. So that was cool to see like how decks adapted and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, obviously as a podcast that started 5 years ago talking about exclusively Modern, we are now dipping our toe into the Pioneer world a little bit. We're talking about it a bit more because it does seem to be sort of the premier Eternal format, at least being played at this moment.
Well, it's just new and exciting, I think. It's a little bit of a brewer's paradise because there isn't like a concrete metagame. There's been like some bans to shake it up so that a metagame hasn't really coalesced. So everybody's just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. Not to mention, you know, this Players Tour was Pioneer. So all the best Magic minds in the world were getting ready for it. So I don't think that it's replacing Modern by any means. I just think it's new and exciting, and it's fun to talk about, fun to watch, and fun to see what's happening.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot of times over the last 6 months, really since the introduction of Pioneer and since sort of Modern hit the post-Horizons craziness. But the power level of Modern has just gone up so much now.
Yeah.
It's such a linear format in terms of what all the decks are doing and how quickly they're doing it, that these Pioneer decks do feel a lot more like Modern from 8 years ago. They feel a lot like what Modern kind of felt like when it started, where there were a few things that were being pushed that were really, 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 really good. Obviously, we don't have things that had to get immediately banned, like the Locust lands or things like that. Like, just because obviously stuff's new.
Well, they did the whole ban list like that. Instead of having an opening ban list and then, oops, we missed Cloudpost. Instead, they just did totally blank. And then, yeah, there was stuff they had to ban, obviously. They banned, Once Upon a Time and Field of the Dead and Oko and other stuff that I'm blanking on, obviously. I mean, there were a bunch of Pioneer bans.
There's been a bunch, yeah.
So they did, I mean, it was kind of like Modern where it's like, let's see how this goes. But that was like the whole intent. It wasn't like, here's a ban list. Oops, we missed Blazing Shoal. Because I guess that's a thing.
Yeah. You also wonder with some of those old bans from the beginning of Modern, if they were to unban some of those cards from the first year.
I don't want to play against Blazing Shoal. I don't care if it's good or not. I don't want to play against that.
So anyway, guys, we are going to talk today about a bunch of cool stuff. We're going to talk about some of the most underplayed cards in Modern. Each of us has a handful of cards that we want to talk about that we think are just like bonkers insane, probably not quite tier 1 powerful, but maybe, and stuff just that we just think is really, really, really awesome that we want to see more of in Modern. And we think there should be more of in Modern. There's a couple wacky lists to go along with it. But before we get into all that fun stuff, I want to remind everybody here, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, hit that subscribe button, the notification bell, so you know when these videos go up. If you're listening, give us a review on iTunes, and of course, go to patreon.com/the MMcast. It's such a perfect and awesome way to support what we're doing because we need your support to keep developing the show, to keep growing the show. And if you want to follow along with anybody that does the show, you can follow me at Ben Bateman Media.
I'm at Dudard, Dudardd.
At the MMcast on Twitter. And that pretty much wraps up our shout out. So I think we should get into the episode. Do you want to go first or should I?
Sure. So I guess for like underplayed cards in Modern, I'm kind of the research guy on the show. So I actually looked at a bunch of old Modern deck lists on mtgtop8.com because they have, like, you can select a year. You can be like, what did the Modern metagame look like in 2014? And it has like percentages from top events, and you can look at some lists. So I looked at a bunch of old Modern deck lists, and I also looked, Pioneer's been on our brain because of the Players Tours, and it's an exciting new format, and I've been following it closely. So most of my list is stuff that I've collected from Pioneer or from, old Modern stuff that just like fell by the wayside. So I guess I want to start with Wild Nicatl.
Okay.
Wild Nicatl was such a huge player in Modern that they banned it at one point. They were like, this card is preventing other aggro decks from getting played. Like, you just can't play an aggro deck without Wild Nicatl in it. It's so easy to have it be a 3/3, and you just get access to so many powerful spells, and the life loss from your lands doesn't matter because you just kill them. And then it got unbanned because they felt that the format was powerful enough, and then Wild and Cattle didn't get played at all.
Yeah, it is interesting. So if we're talking about just the basic rate, this is something that I talked about a bunch last week because I was doing we were doing these videos now on the channel. If you guys haven't seen them, they're called 10 Minutes of Magic. It's like an old series from Anchor. They're quick, like hot takes or whatever. We're also doing a hot take series, but
yeah, those are cut from the episode. But yeah, I mean, if you're a podcast follower, you are missing out on the 10 Minutes of Magic. Right?
Yeah,
so you should check out the YouTube just to see this new series we got going.
It's almost never 10 minutes. It's more like 3 to 5. But the point is, last week, one of the episodes was Scythe Tiger, building around Scythe Tiger in Modern. If you guys have listened to the show for a long time, you know that I have a penchant for that card. I love Scythe Tiger. It's a 3/2 on turn 1. It has Shroud. It costs 1 green. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you sacrifice another land. The point there is that it's a 3-power creature you can play on turn 1. And of course, you have to sacrifice a land, but it's very hard to interact with because it has Shroud. So if you're looking at the rate you're going to get on turn 1 in Magic, and in Modern specifically, getting 3 power on turn 1 for 1 mana, there's not that many things that do it. There's like 4 maybe or something.
And if you think of like the premier aggro decks in Modern, like Burn or like Eldrazi or something, like Eldrazi aggro or whatever, you don't get a rate like that in any of these other decks. You're playing like a 2/2 haste that draws your opponent cards. You're playing like a Monastery Swiftspear that attacks for 1, maybe 2 the next turn. But
yeah, Delver maybe.
You're not attacking
possibly
for 3 on turn 2 typically. Maybe with Monastery Swiftspear, but you know, you won't be developing your board in that case, right? Like you can go Wild and the Cattle into Wild and the Cattle, Wild and the Cattle, and just attack for 3.
Yeah, I mean, okay, there are plenty of 2/1s for 1, right? And there's a 2/2 for 1, several of them. But there's not just a vanilla 1 green 3/3 creature for 1 mana. That does not exist. They don't want to do that because that's not the right. You're supposed to have to work a little harder for that.
Right. And so like looking at some of these old Modern metagames from before they banned the Cattle, when it was like an accepted part of the meta and everybody knew it was a thing and people were playing Anger the Gods to make sure they hit that 3 toughness and whatever, you would have like multiple different zoo decks in the metagame. You would have like traditional Naya Zoo. You'd have like 4 or 5 color Zoo. And then you'd have like with Tribal Flames often, which I don't know if any of you listening have snapcasted a Tribal Flames. It's great.
It's dope. Yeah, I've done it.
And then there was like Death Shadow Zoo even. Once people kind of started figuring out that Death Shadow was a good card, you just could throw that into your Zoo deck because you're paying so much life to your lands because you're playing like a 4-color shock and fetch mana base that, well, I'm just going to play some, Gitaxian Probe, Street Wraiths, and Death Shadows, which you can't play Gitaxian Probe anymore. But I feel like Wild and the Cattle has really fallen by the wayside, especially now that there's like these Death Shadow Teamer Battle Rage decks. It feels like some type of Become Immense Teamer Battle Rage strategy would be perfect for Nacatl, or in some of the like Burning Tree Emissary, Reckless Bushwhacker decks.
Yeah.
Nacatl fits right into there as well. You just play like 1 Temple Garden and you fetch for it when you draw your Nacatl or whatever, right? Like you can literally just be playing red-green with 1 Temple Garden or something and like 12 fetch lands, and you'll just always have a 3/3.
I think the reason that it doesn't see play anymore is if you look at what people have wanted to do with like an aggressive threat on turn 1 over the last couple of years, I think Hollow One is the best example of what the format was like. Okay, so if I jump through these hoops, I can get a 4/4 or even possibly 2 4/4s on the first turn of the game. And that's like blitz enough that I should be able to win the game that way. You even look at stuff like Stubborn Denial, and that's rewarding you for having 4 power instead of 3 power. It definitely seems like the format has moved in a direction where having just a 3/3 for 1 mana that's interactable, that can be bolted, obviously, just isn't good enough. And I mean, I love the card, and I would totally build around it because I've built plenty of decks that just want 3 power on turn 1, but that's why, to me, it feels like it doesn't see the play.
And the other thing about Wild Nacatl is you could also just slot it into like a Hate Bear's Shell,
sure,
or, anything that has those colors. Like, I think the color restriction is much easier to meet than like a discard a bunch of cards restriction or have a bunch of cards in your graveyard for Gurmag Angler restriction or something. But I do think that cards like Hollow One and Gurmag Angler pushed it out a little bit, because if your opponent can play like Tasigur on turn 2 off of a Thought Scour or something, your 3/3 is a little bit embarrassing.
That's the difference of the quality of threat you're getting. Well, that's a lot on Wild Nacatl. I like Wild Nacatl. But I I think because it's interactable, that's the thing that holds it back. I think the fact that like it's not a hexproof or a shroud creature, it doesn't have protection.
I put it on my list because I think it's not seeing enough play.
That's fair. That's fair.
I get that maybe, you know, I can see where metagames would be unfriendly towards it. I just think the rate on the card is so powerful, and historically it's been a card that Wizards has looked at the numbers and been like, wow, this card is just seeing too much play. It's too good. We got to ban it. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it's a tier 1 strategy, but I feel like I should be seeing... Like, I think that Zoo as a deck has the potential to be one of those decks that, like, we refer to as pillars of the format or whatever, where it's like, yes, the metagame is unfriendly towards Jund, but it just top 8'd a GP. Or, like, the metagame is unfriendly towards Burn because there's, like, a life gain deck that's really popular or whatever. Or, like, a Kitchen Finks deck is really popular. But Burn just top 8'd because they just, like, blasted somebody with lightning bolts. I mean, I feel like being able to just blast somebody with Wild Nacatls and Tribal Flames should be something that is... good enough for Modern.
I think it's totally good enough, and I would wager that Wild Nacatl is probably a higher quality card than almost any card on my whole list, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to start with my first card, and that is going to be Wargate. Wargate, one of my favorite cards, a card that I've wanted to make work for a long time, always has seemed a little expensive, not quite fast enough. Those of you that don't know what Wargate is, I will explain right now. Wargate is a sorcery from Alara Reborn. It is blue, white, green, X. Search your library for a permanent with converted mana cost X or less. Put it into play, then shuffle your library. So the obvious thing that you can do with it is get a land into play for 3 mana. Any land from your deck just onto the battlefield. So if Rampant Growth for 2 mana is going to search your deck for any basic land, put it into play tapped, then Wargate is going to search for any land and put it into play untapped.
I mean, compared to the rate on like Expedition Map or Sylvan Scrying, you're paying 2 mana to get a land to any land to your hand, and then you're spending a land drop to play it. This putting it directly into play is like pretty appealing.
It's pretty significant. And you also look at some of the cards that have been like over the years good in certain strategies. Take a card like Reshape, for instance, right? So Reshape is a card that in Eggs decks would put like a Lotus Bloom into play. Well, this just puts Lotus Bloom in play without sacrificing anything. For 3 mana, it accelerates you on the 3rd turn into 7 mana on turn 4. Seems kind of reasonable, seems sort of decent. I think another thing about Wargate that's so cool and why I like it so much is that take a card like Bring to Light. So Bring to Light's going to cast an instant, a sorcery, or put a creature into play, right? For 5 mana. So you can search your deck at sorcery speed for a whole bunch of cool stuff. It doesn't reference enchantments. It doesn't reference planeswalkers. In fact, this is one of the only cards in all of Magic and all of Modern that can put a planeswalker from your deck directly into play, right? Like, for 3 mana, you can search your library for a planeswalker. This is just putting it directly into play for 3 colors. So,
yeah, I mean, I guess the difference is that Bring to Light, the X is kind of baked into the cost of the card. So for 5 mana, you're getting a 5-drop. With Wargate, for 5 mana, you're getting a 2-drop. I think that's like the big disparity.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's no doubt. Like Bring to Light for what it's doing, I would... If Bring to Light included planeswalkers, then I probably wouldn't think Wargate was as awesome. See, I came to the conclusion of using Wargate because I was trying to come up with the doubling season Jace Architect of Thought deck.
Okay.
I feel like everybody knows this idea.
That's cool.
Yeah, so the whole idea with the deck like that, and this is something that started happening, I think, around the time they printed Jace Architect of Thought. Now there's 3 planeswalkers that do it, maybe 4 even. But the idea is the doubling season, because when a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, gets double its counters. Any planeswalker whose ultimate is twice its starting loyalty or more, you can just ultimate the planeswalker, right? So Architect of Thought comes down. If you have doubling season in play, comes down with 8 counters on it. You -8, search your library and their library for a permanent, put it into play. You get another Architect of Thought. You do it through your whole deck. You get all their best threats. And preferably you have some way to win the game off of your own deck as well. You also Nahiri can come down and ultimate right away, searching for Emrakul, or the red-green Samut, the one from the Tested, is it? The 4-mana one?
Yeah, Samut the Tested from Our Devastation?
Yeah, and it does a similar thing.
Oh, okay, cool.
To the Nail Entwined, I think, is her ultimate.
Yeah, I think but it may be Planeswalker or creature. Because I think you can get a bunch of Samuts. So you can do the same thing.
Oh, wow. That's sick. So I had seen a deck similar to this. They actually did like I think it was a Mox event, or not Mox, the Community Cup event, where they do kind of like wacky formats. And they did like a Ravnica block constructed, where you used all 6 Ravnica sets. And this was one of the decks that both teams built, because it was like you could only have a certain number of copies across your whole team. And so people use like 4 of their doubling seasons and 4 of their Jaces for like this type of deck. I think it was Sultai. They were using like the Vraska as well.
Yeah,
and, like,
that makes sense.
But Samut wasn't legal, so I didn't even realize that Samut could do this, but that's awesome.
Yes, Samut is... she has 4 loyalty, and her ultimate -7 search your library up to 2 creature and or planeswalker cards and put them on the battlefield.
Oh, so she stays in play too.
Yeah.
If you don't win the turn, you go off. But
Oh yeah, and then Vraska the Unseen is great because her ultimate makes 3 assassin tokens, which doubling season makes 6 assassin tokens, and they all have player death touch.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think that that's the best thing you can do in Modern, but it's maybe the best thing you can do in Ravnica block constructed.
Well, so my whole theory with this and why Wargate hit my radar was like, I was trying to figure out a way to get doubling season and a way to get planeswalkers. And I had so few ways to do it that I was like, there's lots of big mana decks in Modern. I mean, people accelerate into Primeval Titans and you know, Hour of Promises and all these big 5 and 6 mana spells a lot. It's a thing people do. So why not just try to build this deck? And then I was like, Wargate's like just the business.
Well, and it ramps you.
And because Wargate gets you Lotus Bloom, and you probably want to play Lotus Bloom in this deck anyway because your spells are so expensive, on turn 3, you just Wargate for Lotus Bloom. So here's like the play in the deck that on testing I figured out. So the big breakthrough for me was when I realized that Pentad Prism is the card you want in this deck. Because turn 2 Pentad Prism hits a turn 3 doubling season, which means that on turn 4, right, you can just go, or wait, what was it? It's, how did this work? It's Lotus Bloom on turn 4 is the thing you want, because Lotus Bloom gets you to 7. So you cast your doubling season or whatever, and then a Pentad Prism comes down for 4. You play it for 2, but it accelerates you, it doubles, and that plays any of your 4 mana planeswalkers. Whatever the math is, there's a way that like with your like, you know, 2 mana open, you basically are able to just turn that 2 into the planeswalker, the turn.
Yeah, so it's so funny that you mentioned Pentad Prism, because I remember that like that felt to me like a card that glued together a lot of these janky combo decks where it's like, I just don't have enough mana for, like, my combo is just too expensive. It costs like 7 mana or whatever, but it's like, wait, Pentad Prism will get me to 7 mana. And like the one combo deck that like broke out using Pentad Prism was Ad Naus, where Ad Nauseam needs 6 mana for its combo,
right,
or 8 if you're going off of Phyrexian Unlife. And so it was like, it's just a little bit too expensive to be good. And Pentad Prism was the card that glued it together. And I feel like that's true for like so many janky combo decks that I've seen people brew in Modern, where it's like, things are just a little bit too expensive. Pentad Prism.
Oh, I know what it was. Yeah. Sorry. I was just, it does make sense, because either you Wargate on turn 3 into your Lotus Bloom, hitting 7 mana on turn 4, which means you then spend 5 of it to cast the doubling season, and the remaining 2 to cast the Pentad Prism for 4, that ends up playing any of the 4 mana planeswalkers, and you win the game on turn 4. And that's whether or not you Wargate for it, or you just suspend Lotus Bloom on turn 1. Either way, turn 4 with the Wargates and all the things just wins the game.
So in this deck, are you playing like Birds of Paradise or anything?
So I thought about it, so you could like turn 2 Wargate. Is that the idea? Because the deck plays 0 creatures other than the fatties.
Got it.
Because currently, like the list that I had built, I was trying to figure out the best ways. I think Force of Negation is good in this deck. I like the idea that you can tap out for a doubling season, and then like any of your extra copies of, say, Wargate or extra Jaces or, you know, Serum Visions, whatever, can save you and make sure you can win the next turn. And I also think some of like Swan Song is an interesting option here, because if you tap out on turn 2 for a Pentad Prism and they try to do something, you can still use the Pentad Prism to just counter something. You don't really care if they have a 2/2, you're going to win the game. So like, feels like probably the most efficient, cheapest Modern counterspell for what you're doing, because Spell Pierce obviously is like a better card just in general, except that you don't want to be playing Spell Pierce when they can actually pay for it.
I mean, I like, Force of Negation. It's funny because now that we have like a Force of Will variant in Modern, it's so funny because there's so many times in Legacy where people are talking about a card and they're like, yeah, it's pretty good, but worst case, you just pitch the Force.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same with Wargate, right? Like if you're stumbling on mana, or like, you know, Wargate's a little bit too slow for the matchup or whatever, it's like, it pitches the Force, it's fine.
So my favorite part about the list I put together is, you know, the winning threats are 2 copies of Emrakul. That's the big one, because the last copy of your giant Jace thing, you're just going to get Nahiri and then just pull Emrakul and just attack. Because if you don't have, the deck doesn't currently have some way to just give all your things haste. So like, you don't want to give them a turn to respond. And generally speaking, if you attack with an Emrakul, you'll just win the game.
Yeah.
But if they have like an Ensnaring Bridge or something like that, there's a single copy of Nicol Bolas Planeswalker in the deck. Because Nicol Bolas Planeswalker with doubling season comes down and just immediately ultimates. And -9ing a Nicol Bolas Planeswalker is so good. Plus it's blue, so you can pitch it to your Force of Negation. So I was like,
pitches the Force. That's the secret to this deck. Well, and also with Nicol Bolas Planeswalker, if you're like putting Lotus Bloom into play, you can just like tap for triple black, cast it sometimes.
That's like the whole entire reason I was like, this will be a fun deck to build, because with all the ramp with the Pentad Prisms and the Lotus Blooms, there's going to be games where you just cast one of these giant things and probably just win the game. Well, also keep in mind what happens if you get your doubling season, you try to resolve a Planeswalker, they counter it. Now you're kind of stalling out. Maybe you play another Planeswalker. Then you draw like another Pentad Prism just mid-game and you just cast it for 4. It's like even better than the Lotus Bloom anyway. Getting up to the high mana total in this deck doesn't seem that unreasonable. You just don't have that many ways to control the game or survive. Anyway, this is all this to say that I think Wargate is really awesome, and I think should be played more because I think it does a lot of really cool stuff, and that's why Wargate was the first card on my list.
Strong agree.
This deck also has like doubling season though. Yeah. I mean, like Wargate is the card that's on your list, but maybe doubling season is a card that like is powerful enough for Modern that hasn't been getting played.
They were both on my list. I didn't feel it was fair to just go from one to the other, so I just decided I would talk Wargate and just, shove in doubling season.
It is interesting that on doubling season is kind of roundly considered one of the stronger cards in like Commander, especially in Super Friends, because of this exact reason. So many Planeswalkers get to ultimate the turn they come into play if you have doubling season. But your doubling season is the ultimate poster child for incredibly powerful card that does nothing when you play it. Right. And that's its downside.
100%.
Well, I think the Pentad Prism is maybe the secret to like doubling season does nothing, but you can save Pentad Prism mana for like play doubling season and give you an extra mana boost to play something else. Or like you said, if you can have 2 mana left over to play the Prism post doubling season, then you can cast basically any of the Planeswalkers that help you go off in your deck.
The other version of this deck that I would build is probably like the non-Wargate version, honestly, and I think it's just the blue-green flash version where the only non-flash cards you're playing in the deck are the fatties, the Planeswalkers, and the doubling seasons. But that's like the growth spiral version that's going to just like basically try to every single turn just counter things and just hit your land drops, and then just cast a big thing. That and probably counter magic to back it up and whatnot. But
I think I like this version better too. I mean, I like that you have these huge bursts of mana that allow you to doubling season plus something in the same turn. And like the classic doubling season in Commander thing is the Tameo from Eldritch Moon, whose name I'm blanking on.
Field Researcher.
Tameo Field Researcher.
Right.
Because she Ancestral Recall plus Omnisciences when she ultimates, and you can ultimate her off a doubling season. I mean, it's interesting because like she's like not as good as Jace Architect of Thought in this deck, which is interesting. But she's like another consideration where she's like a 4 mana Planeswalker that with doubling season comes in, ultimates, does something busted.
And she's in Wargate's colors.
Yeah. And she can cast the Emrakul if it's in your hand, right?
I think also, if I remember correctly, if you play 5 mana Tameo, she also ultimates immediately.
I don't know. I guess like the thing is like a lot of times you're not gonna have mana left over after you do this combo. So like you play your Jace, you get another Jace, you sacrifice it, it goes to your hand. It doesn't matter that much because you can't cast it again probably. But
yeah. So that's my first card. What you got next?
So my next card that I want to talk about is stuff we've been seeing in Pioneer. And I actually did see a Modern Inverter list that looks pretty interesting, but like Inverter of Truth being one of the major Pioneer decks breaking out after these Pro Tours. And I'm kind of going to lump it in with Underworld Breach.
Will you kind of explain just so people understand what the Inverter deck is? Because I think it's...
Yeah, so we talked about it on the episode last week, but if you skipped it because you don't care about Pioneer, here's the breakdown. Inverter of Truth, it exiles your library, and then you shuffle your graveyard into your library. So your graveyard becomes your library is gone. And then the deck in Pioneer typically wins with Thassa's Oracle or Jace Wielder of Mysteries, which if you have no cards in your library and you draw a card, instead of losing the game, you win the game. Thassa's Oracle is a little bit different. It's when it enters the battlefield. You look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue, put 1 on top, the rest on the bottom in a random order. And if your devotion to blue is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. So the idea is you delve out your graveyard with like a dig through time or something. You Inverter to have like 2 cards left in your library, and then you like draw them with draw cards, like draw spells, and then you play Thassa's Oracle and you win the game. Or Jace Wielder of Mysteries, whatever. So it's making a big splash in Pioneer, in part because you have access to Dig Through Time. Dig Through Time is like a great delve spell that finds your combo and digs out your graveyard so that you can win faster with Inverter. Because if you Inverter with like an 8-card library or an 8-card graveyard, it's going to take you a little bit longer to dig through that and win the game. But Dig Through Time kind of does double duty in that way. But that said, I mean, I think that the combo seems, especially with Thassa's Oracle, seems powerful enough for Modern, especially because Inverter of Truth is like a 6/6 flying, which can block and buy you time, or it can beat them down. Like if you end up with an 8-card library and it's going to take you a while to win the game, Inverter can just beat them up. Or also like you can dig out your graveyard with Tasigur, which is like a fine control card that also... the decks that have been getting played in Pioneer are like a blue-black control deck with this combo in it, because it's just a 2-card combo. You can really kind of fit it in any shell. Blue-black control was just the one that emerged as the top dog, although there was like a blue devotion deck that just splashed Inverter. I do not have the best version in my mind for Modern, but I did see an Inverter list that somebody was trying out in Modern, and I feel like it deserves to be explored. And same with Underworld Breach. I feel like the bigger card pool in Modern has got to be friendly to Underworld Breach. Again, I think it's going to take some like real brewing strength and testing to figure out what the best build of Underworld Breach in Modern is.
Yeah.
But the deck is so powerful in Pioneer, and it's not as reliant on dig through time. It just needs a little bit of card selection to find its combo pieces, and then it can win. The Underworld Breach deck, what it's doing is a little more complicated. They're using Lotus Field and then one other land, and then you Hidden Strings to untap both your lands, which Hidden Strings is Ben Bateman favorite.
Love Hidden Strings.
You untap both your lands, so now you're like netting 4 mana. And then previously they've been using Chronic Flooding, but at Players Tour Phoenix, Channel Fireball, the Channel Fireball team was all playing this version where you Fae of Wishes for a Tome Scour, and then so 2 of your mana is Hidden Strings, make 4 mana, and then you Tome Scour yourself, and then you Tome Scour yourself again, and you Hidden Strings to like make 4, and then you Tome Scour yourself twice, and you use the last 2 to Hidden Strings. Because the Tome Scours put enough cards in your library that you can keep casting things out of your graveyard with Underworld Breach, and the Hidden Strings makes mana, so then you can get your whole library in your graveyard, and then you can do whatever you want.
And this was over this last weekend?
Yep, at Phoenix.
So last Thursday, there was a video posted on this channel by me as a 10 Minutes of Magic on why Tome Scour needs to be played more in Modern. Now, I know that's Pioneer, but in fact, I'm sorry, it was in Pioneer. It was a Sultai Tome Scour deck that I put together that I thought was amazing, and nobody watched it. It was the least viewed of the episodes. I was blown away. I was like, I love this card. And then, of course, it was the breakout card. Wow, that's pretty darn cool.
Y'all YouTube fans are just leaving genius on the table.
Crazy.
Yeah, so I think that both Inverter a little bit less so, but Underworld Breach is a deck that it's an obviously powerful card. I mean, the comparisons to Yawgmoth's Will are obvious, and in a lot of situations, it's better than Yawgmoth's Will. I mean, if you just swapped this card out in the decks that it's in right now with Yawgmoth's Will, the decks wouldn't function because they need to be able to cast the same card multiple times out of their graveyard, and Yawgmoth's Will can't do that. So, like, we have Yawgmoth's Will in Modern. It's a combo that works in Pioneer. What is the best configuration for Modern? Do you need this Lotus Field thing, or are there enough rituals in Modern that you can just get by with rituals and Manamorphoses? Because Manamorphose is also not in Pioneer.
Sort of a take on. It's just basically kind of a take on Storm in some ways.
Right. I mean, the Underworld Breach deck would be a take on Storm. I think the appeal of the card is, and really the Pioneer version is kind of a take on Storm. You're just milling your whole library and winning with either Thassa's Oracle, or you have enough mana. The Channel Fireball team version also got rid of the Thassa's Oracle, and they were playing Expansion Explosion as their win con. Because you can net enough mana off this combo. Once you're like going off and you have a ton of cards in your graveyard, you can just start like, you can like pour over the pages to net mana, and like you can net mana in more ways that eventually you like have a ton of mana and you can just explosion them to death. They were also playing a Jace Wielder of Mysteries in the sideboard that you could wish for with Fae of Wishes. And then you could win with that. So they weren't playing Thassa's Oracle, but there's like enough ways to win with your whole library in your graveyard, and you can cast any of those cards. That it, like maybe Grape Shot is one of the win conditions in Modern. Maybe they do the Wishboard thing. Maybe the Wishboard thing is too slow, and just the one Grape Shot's your main win con. Maybe you play a Thassa's Oracle.
Feels like you could turbo the deck a little more easily.
Yeah, there's probably more ways to untap lands, which you might know better than me. I
can't believe the Hidden Strings has already entered this conversation, and I didn't suggest it, because I literally spent 2 hours last week trying to come up with some way to use Hidden Strings in a video for this channel, and I couldn't come up with something I thought was good enough to make a video.
Yeah, so at Phoenix, I did see somebody cipher Hidden Strings onto Fae of Wishes, because Fae of Wishes is just a 2-mana flyer.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a perfect Hidden Strings target.
And it's a 1/4, right? Like,
yeah, dodges Bolt, not that Bolt's in Pioneer, but it dodges Lightning Strike, which is getting played in Pioneer. So
I always try when I do the Hidden Strings decks to come up with some Invisible Stalker Solana Ledgewalker deck where I'm going to like turn to it and then like be able to do something with my mana in combat where like I tap the lands, connect, untap again. Like, I don't know. That's always what I want to do. But I could never figure. I figured like maybe something that you could sing.
Flash and Jin Cataxias, right?
Yeah, some
That's
sort of.
Isn't that the Sword of Feast and Famine?
Is that something people do?
Like if you have 5 lands,
commander play. Marshall, big commander player. So we're gonna get the commander scoop here.
right? If you have 5 lands or more in play, and you have a creature with Sword of Feast and Famine, if you in the combat damage step put the Feast and Famine trigger on the stack, tap all 5 of your lands, they untap, tap all 5 of them again. You have 10 mana in your mana pool. Flash and Jin Cataxias.
Dope. That's a modern play if I've ever heard one. So that's awesome. I think that sounds like a really fun deck. I mean, I'm really excited to see. We've classically talked about, how do you make legacy strategies work in Modern, so now it's going to be interesting to see how do Modern strategy work in Pioneer and vice versa.
One thing I'd like to throw in there, that one card that Modern has access to in this vein that Pioneer doesn't is Leveler. And for a long time, people have been talking about whether or not a mono blue Leveler deck, when Jace Wielder Mysteries came out, there was some talk about like, between Jace and Labman, now we have 2 ways that like Leveler, and there was some talk about like you could also still be playing like Trickbind or Nimble Obstructionist, so that if you wanted to just go on the Leveler beatdown plan, you could, and those cards are not bad in a fetch land format.
Right.
But now, because Thassa's Oracle kind of wants you to go all in on blue, you could theoretically make a mono blue control combo deck with Leveler. I
saw a Blue Moon Shell that was playing Leveler and Jace Wielder of Mysteries, because Jace Wielder of Mysteries is just a fine 4-mana planeswalker, draws a card every turn, it mills you to like give you some Snapcaster fuel or Delve fuel for Logic Knot or whatever. And then if you have the Leveler, that wins the game, because a lot of the Blue Moon decks are just a big pile of card selection and permission and lightning bolts, and then they're looking to win the game either with like Snapcaster Lightning Bolt Beatdown or some 2-card combo, be it Through the Breach or Splinter Twin obviously was the original one, but and Leveler Jace was an option. The one thing I will say about Leveler with Thassa's Oracle is that's like a 7-mana combo, because Leveler exiles your entire library right on the spot. Inverter, you can actually untap and you have a couple of draw steps to win, so you don't have to have the full 6 mana up front. With Leveler, you have to have the full 7 mana up front, which is kind of a lot. But if you're a control deck, you'll hit 7, so maybe it's a consideration. I liked it with Jace in particular, because with Jace is a 4-drop. Theoretically, you can go turn 4 Jace, draw, turn 5 Leveler, activate Jace, I win.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that we're obviously this space being explored more and more now is something that we're going to see in both formats, just because we have the Oracle now existing is a more consistent and cheaper way to be able to win the game.
Yeah, it's already getting played in Ad Nauseam, which is a deck that it just slotted into over Lab Maniac because it's not as vulnerable to Lightning Bolt or Fatal Push or whatever.
Our ice cold take from a few weeks ago of Thassa's Oracle is better than Lab Maniac was frozen cold.
Now it's more of a no-duh take.
But because we don't have that much time today, I do want to jump into the next card here so we can keep talking. I'm going to go back to the well on a card that I've loved for a long time. And what I really want to say, is that Nicol Bolas, the Ravager, is the card that I want to use, but I don't actually think that's the answer, because the only way I'm going to convince you guys to use this card is by going back truly to the well, which is the card Training Grounds. So for 1 blue, enchantment, Training Grounds. Activated abilities of creatures that you control are reduced by 2 colorless mana. There's a billion cool things that you can do. The best way to take advantage of Training Grounds is you find creatures that are already pretty good, that have a cost of 1 colored mana and 2 colorless, and get them in play so that you have some really good effect that you're just getting over and over again for 1 mana. Now, initially, I got excited about doing this with Nicol Bolas the Ravager, because I love the idea that you play this 4/4 flyer on turn 4. He costs red, black, blue, 1 for a flying 4/4 creature that when he enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. And then on turn 5, you slam your 5th land and you just transform him automatically. You just pay 5 and he flips.
You can attack first, get in for your damage, and flip.
And when he flips, he's pretty darn good. He's a really good planeswalker when he flips. But that's asking a lot. It's asking that you be able to just like resolve a 4/4 that doesn't get interacted with. You've already played a Training Grounds that hasn't been interacted with. You flip the card, and they don't just like, I don't know, have Assassin's Trophy or something like that. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like play your 4-drop, untap with your 4-drop, win on turn 5 is something that you can do with a lot of strategies, including Jace Wielder Mysteries Leveler, for example.
Yeah, but and he's not the best way to use it, but I did come up with at one point this cool idea for a deck that was going to take advantage of Training Grounds and Nicol Bolas and Pack Rat. Pack Rat is to me like probably the single most awesome way to use Training Grounds, because if you play turn 1, Training Grounds, turn 2, Pack Rat, and then on turn 3, let's say you have like an Urborg in your deck or something like that, you may just be staring down your opponent and just be like, I'll just dump my entire hand and untap with 16 power on my turn. Good luck. That's like an actually really good turn 3 play. I know Jerry T made a deck at one point that he was testing out online doing this. I like the idea of this being a Grixis deck where you have Nicol Bolas as your top end, because I just think like a 4/4 for 4 that makes them discard a card when it enters is fine. It's not like amazing.
It also pitches to Force.
It does pitch to Force.
I don't know if we're playing Force in this deck.
So does Training Grounds.
Now, whenever we talk about a janky, expensive blue card, I'm going to say it pitches to Force. I feel like that's the thing.
We didn't have Force of Negation back when I thought about this.
I think it's also really important because most of these decks, most of the bin brews are I'm a tap out to do something awesome, and if you can't answer it, I win the game. And Force of Negation is that I'm going to tap out to do something awesome, and if you can't stop my Force of Negation from stopping you, I win the game.
Well, the problem with that, though, is that if they do it on your turn, you're screwed. And that's
end step, fetch, Fatal Push is rough.
Is a very real concern. But I do think, because like the biggest thing that holds back basically most of the concepts that I come up with, most of the things that I think are really cool, is that there's not a cheap enough way to consistently get the one card that I need to make the deck work efficiently in the early turns of the game. Training Grounds being another great example of how do you get Training Grounds in your hand on turn 1 every game. Same conversation with Aether Vial in the old Superior decks. How do you always start the game with an Aether Vial? If you start the game with Aether Vial, you almost never lose those games. It would probably be the same with this deck. If you could always start the game with Training Grounds in your opening hand, there's enough things that are great with Training Grounds, but there's only 4 copies of Training Grounds in the deck, and there is no Enlightened Tutor or something like that in this format. So you're in a position where you really need to have the card. But guys will find with Training Grounds the sheer number of things that are good with it. I mean, just Training Grounds with Ballista is already really good. Like, it's just good. Like, it's generally really good. It makes so many cards that you have access to in Modern really, really powerful.
Well, and the London Mulligan, I think, helps these types of brews as well, where it's like, I really need to find this one card on turn 1 or 2, and I just, there's not enough cheaper free card selection. Well, the London Mulligan is free card selection.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these ideas that I, like a couple years ago, was like kind of all in on have changed. London Mulligan now exists. Obviously, you just said Force. So many of the things I come up with are blue. So having really bad, like an extra copy of Training Grounds in this deck is not something you want. So pitching it to Force of Negation sounds wonderful. But yeah, I do think Training Grounds is probably the card that I would focus on more than any of the others. I do think Pack Rat is kind of underplayed. I think the card is pretty good. It's a little expensive to use, but examples like this prove why, like, it's pretty good. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, so in that vein, I actually didn't end up on my list, but it was something I was thinking about, so I'm going to mention it. Similar to Training Grounds, I think Heartless Summoning is a card that I feel like has never really had a breakout deck in Modern. It feels like something that's not ever going to be tier 1, but it feels like something that would like 5-0 some leagues every once in a while and like be something that people are talking about, and I feel like it never has been. I mean, the Modern card pool is pretty friendly to Heartless Summoning, I think.
Heartless Summoning is, for those that don't remember, from Innistrad, I believe. It's 1 black, 1 colorless enchantment. Creatures you control get -1/-1, and your creatures cost 2 colorless less to cast. But it can fully reduce if you had a creature that, Mirror Superior, for instance, is free. It just comes down as a 4/5 for free.
Which, that's what Ben is all about, is free Mirror Superions. But so that's the thing, is there's 2 ways to play Heartless Summoning. You get a discount on your big, highly impactful creatures, your Mirror Superions or your Gitrog monsters or your, Grave Titans or Wormcoil Engines or whatever, right? Like, you can just play big, huge creatures for cheap. And that is cool. Or you can combo. So you can you can loop 2 Mirror Retrievers with a
Reckless Fireweaver or something.
Reckless Fireweaver. Yeah, Blood Artist was the first thing that came to mind, but it's a 0/1, so it dies. But yeah, with the Reckless Fireweaver, something like that, something that cares about creatures entering or dying, or even like the new Daxos or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Being a 2/2 Soul Sister, you gain infinite life. It feels like, I mean, even in Standard, there was a combo with Havengul Lich and
I remember this, yeah.
Yeah, so Having Go Lich is a 5-mana 4/4, which is a bad body, and then you could pay 1 mana to cast target creature. You can cast target creature from a graveyard this turn. If you do, it's a zombie in addition to its other types or something. So it's like a 5-mana card that asks you to...
And then Having Go Lich gains all activated abilities of that creature.
Sure, I forgot about that. That's not relevant to this combo. But so in Standard, you could play it with Perilous Mirror, which is a 2-mana 1/1 that dies, you shock. So you could just... Like, Having Go Lich now costs 3, so you can play it the turn after you Heartless Summoning. This is a 3-mana 3/3, which is much better than a 5-mana 4/4. And the next turn, you can, like, shock for free, pay 1, shock, pay 1, shock, pay 1, shock, and you can just pick off their whole board, machine gun their face.
Yeah.
But in Modern, we have access to, like, infinite combos, like with Mirror Retriever and stuff like that. Not to mention, like, you could just do that combo, and it's probably going to be good enough to win any creature matchup.
I think Heartless Summoning is a good example of a card that, because it costs 2 or less, like most of the conversation when you're talking about a build around card, something that you need to... It actually has a chance to be good in Modern if it costs 2 or less. As soon as it starts to cost more than 2, it gets weird. It starts to get very, very hard to sequence your turns in a way.
Like Pentad Prism or something?
Yeah, and it's hard to sequence your turns. Because like if you're going to tap out on turn 3 for anything that doesn't just win the game, by the time you're getting to the 4th turn, you probably are so far behind.
Your opponent has an Urza in play or something with Archmage's Charm up or whatever. Like, and your opponent's doing something nasty at that point.
If you've gotten double Thoughtseized or something like that, they're going to get that and the thing they took in the first place. Like, there's just a lot of things going on that work against you. But I do think that Heartless Summoning is sweet. Is that your next one?
I would like it to be now. Okay. So it didn't make my list, but it was something I was thinking about, and I just forgot to put it on my list. But when you said Training Grounds, I was like, 2-mana discount. I love 2-mana discounts. Yeah. So the other thing about Heartless Summoning is that enchantments are still pretty resilient in Modern. I would say that artifacts less so because of Kolaghan's Command. Now, Kolaghan's Command is a little bit on the downswing right now, but I do think it's like a card that's ever lurking, and sometimes... So like Isochron Scepter almost made my list, for example. But I think like Kolaghan's Command, the chance that your opponent could be playing it is just so brutal to Isochron Scepter that it makes it almost unplayable. Not to mention like Cryptic Command can bounce it or whatever, and you're just... Because Isochron Scepter is a card that did get played. When I was looking at old Modern decks, there were Isochron Scepter decks in the format that you would just put like, you know, a Lightning Helix on it or something, or like even Silence or whatever. And like, that was reasonable at the time. Now, I just think the format is a little too unfriendly to artifacts. But Heartless Summoning being an enchantment that you also don't have to 2-for-1 yourself to play, makes it's a lot more resilient still in Modern because we don't have Kolaghan's Command for enchantments unless you count Jamoka's Command, which doesn't really get played.
And Heartless doesn't get hated on by Collector Oof or Stonely Silence, which are just good catch-alls.
Sure. Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like people will just have those in their sideboard and they'll bring them in. Now, I do think that people are playing enchantment hate. People will be bringing in Nature's Claim or Abrupt Decay or whatever, and fine. But you don't have to 2-for-1 yourself to play it the way you do for Isochron. So it's not a big deal if your Heartless Summoning dies. You can just cast your stuff and hopefully win that way. I mean, Mirror Retriever gets very bad. The combo version gets bad. But if you're playing it to ramp out like a Gitrog monster or some other big threat, it's fine.
What's the name of the red card 3-drop creature puts a planeswalker directly into play?
Planebound Accomplice.
Is he a 3-drop? He is, right?
I will look that up real quick.
Yeah, the one from Modern Horizons. I believe it's a 3-drop. You pay 1 red to put it into play.
Yeah.
So it feels like a 4-drop because you want to be able to activate it.
Okay, so I love the idea of this deck. Turn 2 Heartless Summoning, turn 3 Planebound Accomplice.
It is a 1/3.
It's a 1/3.
So it's got the butt.
So now it's a 0/2 and you have 2 mana open to just put 2 giant Planeswalkers into play that turn. That seems kind of good, right?
Yeah. It doesn't sound bad.
That sounds pretty sweet to me.
And you're in Rakdos, which is a really strong color pair in Modern. I feel like Rakdos is one of the, if not the strongest, one of the strongest color pairs.
There's probably also, if you wanted to go into a third color,
because you can go turn 1 Thoughtseize into turn 2 Heartless into turn.
Yeah, I mean, I think in any Heartless Summoning deck, you want some Thoughtseizes to clear the way, or at least get the lay of the land of your opponent's hand to figure out if it's safe to go for your combo, or if it's safe to just play a Gitrog. Because like if your opponent just has like a Terminate in hand, then maybe you're either going to Thoughtseize it, or you see they have a Terminate plus a whatever, like Liliana the Veil or something. You're like, okay, I'm not going to go for my big creature on turn 3. I'm going to play it slow. I'm going to sculpt my hand a little bit,
We just have a couple more here, guys, before we get out of here. So I will jump in with my next one, and I will say this is an old favorite. This is not as wonky as some of the ones I come up with. Spreading Seas. This is a card that used to see a ton of play in Modern. This was a standard all-star. It's 1 blue, 1 colorless, enchantment aura. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted land is an island. So there's actually historically, there's always been a bunch of decks that want their lands to be very specific in Modern. Obviously, Tron being probably the all-time most prominent. You also have all the decks with the bounce lands.
Making their bounce land into an island is pretty funny.
It's pretty good.
Now they like bounce to land to get this double land into play. Well, now it taps for 1.
Yeah. Even like just spreading seas against Grixis Shadow is kind of good. Like their mana base is very specific. So taking them off black, taking them off red sometimes can make a huge difference if they don't have the ability to just get where they need to get to. Spreading seas just in general is going to do way more for most people than they realize. Like that's why it was always a favorite card for people, is because just the difference of, taking somebody off their plan the next turn. And again, the opportunity cost is so low. Like it's 2 mana, it cycles, it draws a card. I also think one of the reasons the Spreading Seas is so good is because it's flickerable. And we keep getting more and more things that do that. Specifically in the last couple of years, we got Felidar Guardian. Felidar Guardian obviously is a card that has an infinite combo just built into the format. So being able to just go infinite with Saheeli and Felidar Guardian in Modern is great. But then if you're playing that in a deck that's 2-drop is Spreading Seas, seems pretty good too. I like the idea
of like bounce and replay a Spreading Seas with Teferi Time Reveler.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen people do that actually. So
sweet.
Yeah, I think Spreading Seas is like probably the best card on my list in terms of just actual power level. For some reason, it seems like people have kind of gone away from it.
I think it's better when the format is slower, like back when we were seeing a lot more mid-range decks. Now that the format is like tends to be like a good amount of aggro and combo. I mean, obviously there's like more controlling decks, but a lot of the controlling decks are leaning on like snow mana, like the Urza decks and stuff, that you are not able to mess up somebody's mana bases easily. But I do think that like with Amulet Bloom being a big player, and then Tron is like eternally going to be a big player.
That's very good against Jund, by the way.
Doesn't seem terrible. Yeah, I mean decks like 3-color decks with shaky mana bases. I just think we're seeing less of those.
Yeah,
we're also seeing less decks where like a 2-mana sorcery speed thing that like maybe messes them up is not where you want to be at.
Yeah, it's certainly like I think a little underpowered, but I just think that there are enough things that interact with it and take advantage of it that are already good that feels like a card that I could see.
And like it's also gotten played in Merfolk historically, because giving them an island so that all your creatures are unblockable is powerful. And then the fact that you can put them off of a color, or you can, get their bounce land or get their Tron land or whatever, was worth it. But
my last card that I'll throw out there is a card that actually is seeing a little bit of play right now in one specific deck, and that is Unsettled Mariner. This is a card that was from Modern Horizons. It's blue-white. It's a changeling. Whenever an opponent targets a creature you control, it's just a creature you control, counter that spell or ability unless they pay 1.
Yeah.
Right? So this is like sort of the ultimate tribal hate bear card. It's a good thing that they printed it into 2 colors. It means that you really have to be pretty aggressive with your mana base to just slot it into whatever deck you want. Obviously, Humans takes great advantage of this card. It's now played in Humans decks, I think, pretty traditionally as a 2 or a 3 of, as it should be. It's a bear that's very good. I just think that this card is the glue that makes your turn 2 with so many of these tribal decks hold together. Like, obviously, Humans gets Thalia, and it gets Thalia's Lieutenant, and it gets all these really powerful cards, and that's great. But Modern is a format that has a mana base that totally supports multicolor tribal decks, as we're seeing. So this card is a sliver. I mean, this is the best sliver they've printed in a while. This card is a fairy. This card is a rogue. This card is a friggin' elf if you want it to be. I mean, I don't think you'd ever play it in an elf deck, but this card does so many of the things that all these decks kind of want. They want lords, and then they want kind of aggressive, disruptive hate bears on their second turn of the game. And so I think go into as many 3, 4, and 5 color tribal decks as you can, and just slam 4 of these down, because I think it's good enough to make those decks push just to that next level. I don't think it's been explored nearly as much as it should.
Yeah, like Esper Fairies or something. You get Path to Exile and you get this guy.
Totally. There's like a lot. I mean, like I've talked about building a Rogues deck forever because I've always loved the Cardoon's Blackguard. I've just like wanted to make that work for the longest time.
And similar to Rogues, it is a ninja. So now that there's like that ninja that whenever a ninja hits an opponent, you draw a card, it will draw a card. It's not evasive, so maybe ninjas isn't tried for it, but Rogues maybe.
Yeah, I think that this card though is one that people just were like, yeah, I mean, obviously it fits into Humans and
Spirits.
And Spirits. I've seen Spirits, yeah. And I do wonder, like I've seen those older blue-white Merfolk decks. I haven't seen one in a long time. I mean, this does seem like a good card in Merfolk. Maybe Merfolk doesn't really need it. They have like all these lords, and if they want to play like a Kiora or a Coppola on turn 3 or something, like they can, and that's like kind of better.
When they were playing, there's that Coppola, that's the guy. Okay, I couldn't remember that card's name, and I was like, wait, don't forget about that guy.
He's kind of, he's a merfolk, and he's kind of better. But at the same time, he's not really better because things that cost 3 in that deck are wonky. Like, it's always harder to get away with things that cost 3 in the deck. So, Unsettled Mirror is my final pick. Do you have one last pick before we get out of here?
I do. So I have a couple more left, but for time, I'm gonna throw it to Alex here. If Alex was here, I know what he would say, and I'm gonna say it for him since he's not here. It's Life from the Loam.
That's a good choice.
Alex is always a big fan of Life from the Loam as like kind of a mid-range card dredge, and we do see it show up in Dredge as like, this is a card I could just put one of in my deck and I'll mill it and I can draw some cards off it late in the game if I have to. But like in Modern Horizons, we saw like lands matter was a theme in the set, and we saw that, you know, Ren and 6 got played just because of the rate is so good as a 2-mana planeswalker with like a buttload of loyalty. But none of those cards have really made an impact. Like we talked about Ayula's Influence as being a card we thought was a little bit underplayed, but also like Molten Vortex and Dark Confidant and Get Rug Monster and Tireless Tracker. A lot of these lands cards are just in the format. Courser of Kruphix. Now there's Dryad of the Elysian Grove being like a creature that lets you play extra lands and has a big old butt. It feels like there should be some sort of like aggro loam or some sort of like Jund mid-range lands style deck in the format. And Alex is constantly grinding away at that. And I gotta give up Life in the Loam, especially with cycling lands in the format being another element that Modern Horizons added. Like you can now Life in the Loam to like get back a cycling land plus like a Field of Ruin and like a Urborg or something, and then you can do the like Raven's Crime thing with it, or you can discard all those to Ayula's Influence, or you can draw a bunch of cards, or you can, you just have, it gives you a lot of options as a card advantage engine, and it's pretty resilient because it doesn't have to sit on the battlefield. It's not a permanent that your opponent can kill like a Planeswalker or something. Like Ren and 6 is a good alternative to Life in the Loam, and it's seeing play in Jund, but like your opponent can destroy it with Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay, or they can attack it with creatures, or I just think Life in the Loam is really hard to interact with. It's like resilient to counterspells, resilient to discard. The only thing that hits it is graveyard hate. But if you're not incredibly dependent on your graveyard, then the graveyard hate doesn't even matter that much.
I think there's an interesting play to be made, and I don't think this deck would be that easy to construct, but I know this from Highlander. We do this because you can play Wasteland and Strip Mine, that the Wasteland or Strip Mine lock with Life from the Loam that can happen if you get it going early is not fun and really unfair for people. And the fact that we have Ren and 6 also in the format means that you have another thing that on turn 2 kind of sets the loop up. And I do wonder in Modern how many times you can just Ghost Quarter with one of these effects and just end the game for your opponent. There's probably a handful of decks that play like 0 basics and a handful that play 2 to 3.
Yeah.
So I do wonder, like, what if you're in some sort of weird, like, I'm going to stop you from playing the game, surgical extraction, archive trap type of deck where like you're basically trying to just like see what's in their deck, mill them out, stop their ability to search for things. I'm not sure what the right way to
That's
stop
kind
them.
of interesting, but we have seen like black-green rock decks playing Ghost Quarter with like Life in the Loam. Like I feel like we have a critical mass of cards that want you to play lands that we could see like a black-green rock shell, but built like a lands deck. So with Dryad of the Elysian Grove, it'll allow you to like tap your Ghost Quarters for colored mana. So they're like barely downside at this point. You have Life in the Loams, you have Get Rug Monster, you have Tireless Tracker, you maybe have Courser of Kruphix. And then you're playing Thoughtseizes, Assassin's Trophies, all that kind of stuff. And with Assassin's Trophy and Ghost Quarter, you can really put pressure on your opponent's basics. I will say that, like, because of snow mana, we see a lot of decks just like leaning on Astrolabe for fixing with a lot of basics. But like against these Amulet Titan decks or Tron or something that just like definitively their lands are compressed by like these like weird combo packages or whatever, you can like blast their mana base, and if Ghost Quarters just aren't good in the matchup, you just tap them for mana and get card advantage and do your thing, right?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to it. But anyway, guys, that's going to wrap up all of our special fun cards you should be playing in Modern that you're not, that should see more play. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching to another episode of the Masters of Modern podcast. As you guys can probably tell from what we're doing, we're still focusing on Modern, but we're trying to sprinkle in other content about Pioneer, about other formats. Be sure to check out every single week these new videos we're doing. 10 minutes of magic. They're actually 2 to 6 minutes, but they're a lot of fun, and it's talking about all cool kinds of different stuff. We have the hot takes that go up on Mondays, and of course the video version of this show goes up Friday. Hit that subscribe button. it's essential for this channel.
As we're putting out more like unusual content throughout the week, and we're trying to figure out how we can bring you guys more content, having notifications on is going to be a benefit to you, because you'll be able to see when 10 Minutes of Magic goes up. You'll be able to see when, you know, the hot takes go up. If we decide, like sometimes Alex decides to stream onto the YouTube channel, stream some Magic Arena, you can see that. He was streaming a modern Gitrog monster deck at one point on the YouTube channel, so you can get notifications for all that stuff and know when we have some cool stuff happening.
Yes, and the last thing I want to shout out, guys, is on February 29th in Atlanta, I will be defending my belt, the Movie Trivia Schmodown, the thing I've talked about a million times on here. If you guys have never seen a live show, the atmosphere is electric. It's an amazing experience, and this theater seats about 350. There's about 45 seats left. This is being talked about by most of the people in this little community as perhaps the greatest match of all time. I'm playing against basically the Michael Jordan of the league, the guy that is the 3-time champ. He's the all-time player, and I'm trying to defend my title that I won at the end of last year. So if you've never seen one of these before and you want to go check it out, and you're in Atlanta, go get yourself a ticket, theschmodownlive.com. It's a really fun show, and I highly recommend it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Follow along on Twitter, Ben Bateman Media.
I'm at Dudard, D-U-D-A-R-D-D.
At the MMcast, and go check out Marsh Unfocused, and of course, Kess Wiley, our brother, who's not here. See you guys next week.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.